What would you do if 7 HOA SUVs blocked your private bridge at sunrise and screamed that your own mansion wasn't yours? On my first morning living on the cliffs, the HOA blocked my private bridge and claimed my own mansion wasn't mine. But when they flashed forged papers, hidden surveillance, and a plan to force me off the land I legally owned, I realized I'd stepped into a war they were never prepared to lose. The ocean was still half asleep when I guided my old trawler, the Mariner's Echo, back toward the Cliffside dock. A thin line of sunrise burned along the horizon, turning the Pacific into a sheet of molten copper. The air tasted like salt and wind, clean, sharp, familiar. I'd spent half my life building structures that fought the ocean, but fishing in it had always brought me peace. That was the whole point of buying this place. Quiet mornings, sound of waves, no supervisors or city committees breathing down my neck. But as I rounded the final stretch of rock, peace evaporated. The narrow concrete bridge leading to my mansion, a bridge I owned in full, from the first bolt to the last guardrail, was blocked by a wall of SUVs. Black, white, silver. Their headlights cut through the early light like interrogation lamps, and there, flashing in cold blue pulses, were the unmistakable lights of 2 sheriff vehicles. For a moment, I just stood on deck, one hand still gripping the net rope, water dripping off the tangled mesh and slapping softly against the hull. It didn't make sense. No one came up this way. The road ended at that bridge, and the bridge ended at my home. No tourists, no joggers, no lost drivers, and sure as hell no HOA convoys. But they were here, and they were waiting for me. I shut off the engine, letting the trawler glide toward its berth. The dock creaked under my boots as I stepped onto it, the boards still wet from last night's tide. The sun climbed another inch, revealing the figures standing on the bridge. 7 of them. Suits, tablets, clipboards, all stiff-backed like they were posing for a brochure. And at the front of the lineup, shining brighter than the sunrise, was a bright pink suit. Bethany Reed. I'd never met her in person, but the neighborhood had a way of whispering names. She was the president of the Pelican Cliffs HOA, self-appointed gatekeeper of all things she considered refined living. Thin as a fishing pole, expression sharp enough to gut a salmon, heels stabbing the concrete like she was trying to leave permanent scars. She marched across the bridge toward me, and her voice carried on the wind, shrill, precise, slicing through the morning fog. You there with the boat! Drop that disgusting mess and step forward immediately!" The disgusting mess was the morning's catch. Fresh rockfish, still flopping. I set the net down gently anyway. Her entourage fanned out behind her in perfect formation, blocking the path to my own home as if they were guarding a national treasure. The mansion stood behind them, glass walls catching the sunrise, terraces glowing gold, palm trees swaying above the cliffs. I'd only been moved in a week, and already it felt like the first place I'd belonged in years. "Mr. Cole," Bethany snapped, not waiting for confirmation. "You are hereby ordered to vacate this property, effective immediately." I blinked, slow and steady. "Vacate my property?" She lifted her chin like a queen addressing a misbehaving peasant. "This estate is part of Pelican Cliffs Historic Community Holdings. You are trespassing." My voice stayed level. "How exactly did all of you get onto my bridge?" A flicker, something between annoyance and calculation, crossed her face before she smoothed it over again. "The board and I are authorized to access community assets at any time." "Community assets," I repeated. Interesting choice of words. One of the men behind her stepped forward, tapping away on a tablet as if ready to cite some imaginary statute. Another started filming me with his phone, recording every breath like I was about to confess to a crime I hadn't committed. I took a deep breath. The ocean behind me roared against the cliffs, sending up sprays of silver mist. The smell of brine drifted through the air, Everything about this scene felt wrong, intrusive, aggressive, staged. "I'm going to ask this again," I said quietly. "How did you get onto my private bridge?" Bethany's nostrils flared. "You are not in a position to ask questions. Officer Hale will remove you if necessary." Sheriff Marcus Hale stood at the back of the group, arms folded, jaw tight. I caught his eye. He didn't look convinced by any of this. Good. Someone here still had neurons firing. Bethany thrust a folder toward me. "We have documentation proving the community's ownership of this estate. You, Remy Cole, have no legal right to be here whatsoever. Now gather your belongings and leave before we initiate formal action." The wind picked up, rustling the papers in her hand, and the salty air swept across the bridge, chilling the back of my neck. None of this made sense. Not their confidence, not their numbers, not the absolute conviction on Bethany's face when she said I didn't belong here. Why were they so certain this mansion wasn't mine? Bethany held the folder like it was a sword, its corners fluttering in the wind, as if even the ocean breeze couldn't wait to expose whatever was inside. The sun had now risen high enough to cast a gold edge along the top of her bright pink suit, turning her into a beacon, loud, hard to ignore, and completely out of place on the Cliffside bridge. The tide below us surged and cracked against the rocks, as if the coastline itself disapproved of her presence. I didn't reach for the folder at first. Instead, I watched her hands, perfectly manicured, nails sharp enough to scratch her way through steel, tighten around the papers. She wasn't bluffing. She believed every word she had said. Behind her, the HOA board hovered in a semicircle, as though waiting for their queen to deliver a final blow. Sheriff Marcus Hale stepped closer, his boots scraping lightly on the concrete. He didn't look eager to intervene, but he also didn't look comfortable. "Mr. Cole," he said evenly, "it might be best if you take a look at the documents. Let's keep this civil." Civil. A good reminder. I breathed in the salted morning air, rolled my shoulders, and finally took the folder from Bethany. Her smile flickered. Tight, triumphant, brittle. Inside were 3 neatly clipped pages, printed on high-quality stationery stamped with a golden pelican. The title read, "Pelican Cliffs Heritage Transfer Agreement." Below that, the signature of the previous owner, Judge Henry Whitford, curved across the bottom like a tired wave. Except, it wasn't his signature. I had seen the real one dozens of times while finalizing the sale. Judge Whitford had a specific habit. He looped the H like a knot, and never signed without a faint underline. This imitation didn't even come close. The filing date was wrong too, time-stamped months after a stroke had left him unable to write. "This is fake," I said, keeping my voice level. "None of this matches the actual estate documents." Bethany laughed. A thin, sharp burst. "Of course you'd say that. That's what squatters do. They deny everything until the sheriff escorts them off the premises." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Bethany, I didn't say anything about an escort." She ignored him entirely, her eyes locked onto me. "Judge Whitford signed this agreement 8 years ago. Upon his death, the Cliffside mansion, bridge, and adjoining marina were to be transferred to the HOA for historic preservation. You had no authority to purchase it." Her board murmured like a pack of eager parrots echoing whatever their leader proclaimed. One man smirked at me as if he'd already won. Another adjusted his glasses and typed rapidly into his tablet, probably filing imaginary reports no one would ever read. I lifted the first page closer to the sunlight. The ink shimmered faintly, not the way real signatures do, but the way digital seals do when printed hastily. Someone had rushed this. I looked up at Bethany. "Did you get this from the probate court?" Her smile vanished. "The board has its channels." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you need." The wind gusted suddenly, tossing her hair and nearly ripping the papers from my hands. For a moment, All of us reached instinctively to steady our belongings, except Bethany, who seemed carved from stubborn stone. The ocean roared beneath the bridge, the air heavy with the scent of brine and coming friction. "Mr. Cole," Marcus said carefully, stepping between us, "you completed a lawful purchase. I saw the deed with the county seal myself. But this," he gestured toward the folder, "creates a conflict we need to sort through calmly. Maybe if we all—" "There is no conflict," Bethany snapped. "There is a trespasser, and there is documented community ownership." I turned the last page and saw it, the line that gave away everything. "Effective only upon official recording with the county clerk." I lowered the papers. "Bethany, this was never filed. The clerk's stamp is missing." Her nostrils flared. "That's irrelevant." "No," I said quietly. "That's everything." Her board members exchanged uneasy glances. Even the man with the tablet slowed his frantic typing long enough to look unsure. Bethany stepped closer until we stood mere feet apart on the bridge. The wind whipped at her suit jacket, sending pink fabric snapping like a warning flag. "You don't belong here, Mr. Cole," she hissed. "No matter what paperwork you think you have, this estate was never meant to be in the hands of someone like you." Someone like you. There it was, the slip. The truth that had been simmering beneath her perfect smile and polished threats. This wasn't about a fictional heritage agreement. It wasn't even about Judge Whitford. This was about control, image, power, and I was a variable she didn't intend to accommodate. I handed the folder back, careful not to let the pages tear in the rising wind. "I'm not going anywhere." Bethany's face tightened, as if the words struck her physically. Then she turned sharply toward her board. "We're done here," she snapped. "Prepare the citations and schedule the enforcement action. He wants a fight. He'll get one." The entourage began retreating across the bridge, heels clacking, suits rustling, phones recording. Marcus lingered a moment, his expression apologetic. "I'll have to review this, but don't take anything they say at face value," he murmured. "Something about this doesn't sit right." "I know," I said quietly. "I can feel it." When the last SUV rolled off the bridge and disappeared past the bend, I looked back at the mansion standing proudly at the cliff's edge, sunlight gleaming off glass walls, palm leaves swaying in the wind, superyachts bobbing gently below in the glistening marina. This was my home. I had the deed, the records, the right. So, why were they so sure I didn't? The breeze shifted, carrying the faint whir of something mechanical. I glanced upward just in time to see a small drone hovering in the morning light, silent, near motionless, watching. And then it darted away toward the community, disappearing above the cliffs. The HOA's confidence wasn't random. Something bigger was brewing. The drone's shadow slipped across the bridge like a warning before vanishing into the cliffs, leaving behind a silence that somehow felt louder than Bethany's shouting. The morning sun had climbed higher now, turning the ocean into glittering sheets of blue-green, too calm, too beautiful for the storm I knew was brewing. I stood there for a long moment, letting the wind push against me, grounding myself before heading back inside the house. I had barely hung my jacket on the hook beside the glass doors when the first text alert came through. Pelcan Cliffs HOA notice. Property non-compliance issue logged. A second arrived immediately after. Resident activity captured. Unauthorized commercial vessel operations. A third. Fine issued. $2,500. Additional violations pending review. The messages stacked one after another like falling dominoes, the phone buzzing violently in my hand until I finally set it down on the granite counter. I exhaled slowly. So this was their next move. Bury me in fines. Weaponize rules they barely understood. Hope I'd fold under the pressure the way others apparently had. But they didn't know me. I had built breakwaters against storms twice this size. I had reinforced bridges against 100-year waves. I had spent decades designing systems to withstand relentless force. An HOA tantrum wasn't going to shake me. Still, the timing was suspicious. Too fast, too coordinated. Those citations weren't randomly applied. They had been prepared ahead of time. With that unsettling thought lingering, I opened the slider doors and stepped out onto the deck overlooking the marina. The salty breeze brushed across my face, carrying hints of diesel from the fishing trawler rocking gently below. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries sharp against the hum of the waking coastline. That's when I spotted the boat. White hull, blue trim, official-looking markings that read, Pelican Cliffs Marina Compliance Team. It was easing toward my dock with the slow confidence of a vessel that believed it had every right to be there. 3 people stood on board, 2 with tablets, 1 with a large camera mounted on a stabilizer. The man with the camera filmed continuously, sweeping across my marina as if documenting a crime scene. I walked down the wooden steps toward the dock, each board creaking softly under my boots. The compliance boat glided to a stop, and the woman at the helm looked up at me with a practiced, polite smile that somehow felt more hostile than Bethany's yelling. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she called. "We're here to conduct a visual compliance survey of your marine assets." "Marine assets," I repeated. "You mean my boat?" "And the adjoining dock infrastructure," she added briskly, tapping something on her tablet. The man with the camera circled us in a wide arc, capturing angles of my trawler as though he were shooting an exposé. Every part of the vessel was filmed. Its rusted edges, its weathered wood trim, the nets still drying on the side rails. "You're aware this is a residential luxury environment," the woman continued. "Vessels must adhere to community standards. Commercial fishing boats can disrupt the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood." I almost laughed. "This is my private dock." "But it is visible from the community shoreline," she countered. "Visual distortion impacts property values." "Visual distortion?" I raised an eyebrow. "My trawler is distorting property values?" She didn't flinch. "We have clear regulations regarding vessel condition, noise levels, operational activities, and visual harmony. You appear to be in violation of several sections." Her tone implied that sections were biblical law. "And let me guess," Awaish said, "those sections come with fines." "Correct," she replied. "Multiple." I leaned against the dock railing, letting my gaze drift past them to the open water. A fishing boat bobbed gently farther out, and a few paddleboarders skimmed the surface beyond the marina boundary. Normal, peaceful, not the war zone these people were pretending it was. I turned back to the team. "You do realize I'm not running a commercial business. I'm fishing for food, for recreation. That trawler is an old engineering vessel I restored myself." The cameraman zoomed in dramatically on the hull as if I'd confessed to a felony. The woman maintained her brittle composure. "We simply enforce the standards set by President Reed." "Of course you do." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Tell me something. Did Bethany send you the moment she left my bridge this morning, or were you planning this before I even moved in?" The woman's polite mask flickered. Not much, but enough. "We cannot comment on board deliberations," she said quickly. There it was. The crack. I nodded slowly. "You should know I record all interactions on my property." I pointed to the small security camera mounted under the deck roof. "That includes your arrival?" The cameraman shifted uneasily. The woman cleared her throat. "We're done here," she said. "Expect formal citations by end of day." They disengaged their lines and drifted away. The camera still pointed at me until the last possible moment. By the time their boat disappeared around the rocky bend, the sky had brightened into a hard, clear blue, too perfect a backdrop for what felt like the first act of a long, drawn-out siege. When I climbed back to the mansion, I noticed movement near the road above the cliffs. Two neighbors stood by the guardrail, whispering. When they saw me looking, one of them, an older woman, shook her head sympathetically before turning away. The other leaned closer to her, voice carried faintly by the wind. 3 of the last owners left within a year, he murmured. They never stood a chance. The woman clucked her tongue. And now he'll be next. I closed the door behind me and felt the weight of their words settle heavily into the coastal air. Maybe they believed that. But I wasn't going anywhere. Not until I understood exactly why the HOA was so desperate to push me out. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place perched above crashing waves and wind-whipped palms. I stood just inside the foyer, listening to the muted hum of the ocean through the glass walls. The tension from the morning still clung to me like damp salt on skin. The HOA's sudden aggression, the drone, the so-called compliance team, it all pointed in one direction. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign, a coordinated, deliberate push to force me out. And if they were this confident, they thought they had something I didn't. I grabbed my keys from the console table, the metal cool against my palm. One thing about being a coastal engineer, you learn early that paperwork, the maps, the deeds, the boundary surveys, is more powerful than steel beams or seawalls. If a team of people was trying to bulldoze me out of my own home, then the truth had to be in the records. I drove into town, following the winding cliff road, until it curved away from the ocean and cut inland. The landscape shifted from rugged coast to quiet neighborhoods of stucco homes and trimmed lawns. Eventually, the county administration building appeared, pale stone and glass glowing under the rising sun. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of toner ink and carpet cleaner. The clerk's office was nearly empty at this hour. Just a man in a denim jacket filling out forms and a woman behind the desk, typing steadily. She looked up when I approached, offering a polite smile. "Morning. How can I help you?" "I need parcel boundary maps, I said. "Full survey history for property 47B, Pelican Cliffs, Cliffside Estate." Her fingers paused over the keyboard. "That's the Whitford property, right?" "Used to be," I said. "It's mine now." She nodded and typed for a moment. "Any particular documents you're looking for?" "All of them." That earned a raised eyebrow, but she didn't question it. She printed a set of forms for me to sign and walked into the back to retrieve the files. I waited, watching dust drift lazily through a shaft of sunlight cutting across the floor. The building was so still, I could hear the soft ticking of a wall clock. It was a stark contrast to the sound of the waves hammering against my cliffs, the relentless power of nature echoing the pressure I felt building around me. When the clerk returned, she set a heavy binder and 3 rolled blueprint sheets on the counter. "This is everything on record," she said. "Surveys, deed history, easements, modifications, right-of-way filings. The bridge should be in here too." "Perfect," I said. I took a seat at a nearby table, unrolled the first blueprint, and spread it flat. The paper smelled slightly of age, ink, dust, a hint of sea air trapped from years of being handled. Bold lines marked property boundaries, elevation markers, access points. And then I saw it. The bridge. All of it. Every inch from the city road to the final anchor point at the Sohn, cliff's edge, was shaded in deep blue ink. Private parcel, owned entirely by the estate. I leaned forward, tracing the line with my finger. The HOA boundary was clearly drawn on the opposite side of the hillside, ending 50 feet short of the bridge entrance. They had no jurisdiction there. None. No right to step on it, let alone block it or stage some kind of ridiculous standoff. I flipped to the next page, and the next. Blueprints from different years, all the same. The bridge had never been included in community access. It was never an easement, never owned by Pelican Cliffs, never even discussed as part of a shared infrastructure plan. Bethany hadn't made a mistake on the bridge. She had lied. A slow surge of relief mixed with indignation rolled through me, washing away the tension of the morning. But beneath that, deeper and sharper, was something else, a rising sense of alarm. If Bethany knew the HOA had no right to the bridge, yet marched onto it with a sheriff present, if she ordered compliance teams and fines knowing I could challenge them, if she was willing to produce forged documents, this wasn't about aesthetics. This wasn't about rules. This was about taking the property. All of it. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah Mitchell, my attorney and an old friend from the engineering projects we'd worked on years ago. Saw your alert. Everything okay? I snapped a photo of the blueprint and sent it to her. Remy, bridge is 100% mine. HOA blocked it this morning and sent a fake compliance team. 3 dots. A long pause. Sarah, I'll meet you at my office. Bring the original deed. We need to dig deeper. I closed the binder carefully and returned it to the clerk, thanking her before stepping outside. The afternoon sun was high now, reflecting off parked cars and heating the pavement. But the wind carried the same edge it had earlier, tense, restless, unsettled. I drove to Sarah's office, a renovated craftsman overlooking the marina. She met me on the porch, amber hair swept back, eyes sharp with the same instinct she'd always had, the ability to sniff out legal danger before most people even realized they were standing in it. Inside, she rolled the blueprint across her desk and let out a slow whistle. Well, that's definitive. That's what I thought, I said. So the HOA trespassed? Exactly. And if they trespassed knowingly, she continued, tapping a pen against the margin, what else have they done without authority? That's what I'm afraid to find out. She looked up at me. You're not the first owner they've tried to push out, you know. 3 others in the past 10 years. Always vague reasons. Always sudden. I heard rumors, I admitted. Rumors often start with truth, she said. If they forged a heritage agreement, they're capable of much worse. The ocean glittered behind her through the office window. Boats bobbed gently, their hulls rocking in the soft tide. Normal. Peaceful. The life I wanted. Sarah tapped the blueprint again. This is leverage, Remy. Big leverage. But I need every document you have from the sale. Deed transfers, filings, receipts. If we're going to take on Bethany Reed, we need to be airtight. She won't take this lying down, I said. No, Sarah agreed. She won't. I folded the blueprint carefully and slid it back into its cardboard tube. As I stepped out of her office and into the sunlight, a sense of clarity settled over me. Solid, grounding, inevitable. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought they could push me out. But the bridge, the estate, the marina, they were mine. And now I had proof. Still, one question gnawed at me as I drove back up the coastline. If the HOA trespassed knowingly, what else had they illegally controlled? The road curled upward along the cliffs, the ocean shimmering to my right, like a restless sheet of glass. Yet despite the beauty of the coastline, a heaviness settled in my chest. If the HOA had knowingly trespassed and forged documents, then whatever they had planned wasn't improvised. It was strategic, rehearsed, and aimed directly at the bullseye of my property. By the time I reached the top of the hill, clouds had begun drifting in from the horizon, casting long shadows across the narrow concrete bridge. I drove across slowly, watching the wind ruffle the palms that lined the terrace of my cliffside home. The waves below boomed against the rocks, deep and rhythmic, like a warning drum. I parked beside the stone steps, slipped out of the truck, and inhaled the briny afternoon air. It should have calmed me. It didn't. A low hum floated up from the marina. Not the familiar thrum of the mariner's echo, not the soft lapping of water against the docks. A motor. Too smooth, too polished, too official. I descended the staircase toward the water, each wooden plank warming beneath my boots as sunlight broke through the clouds again. As the marina came into full view, my stomach tightened. A white and navy boat, brand new hull, spotless deck, glided toward my dock. The words Pelican Cliffs Marina Authority were painted down its side, along with an emblem that looked convincing at first glance. 3 people stood on deck, 2 with clipboards and a third in a crisp uniform. The uniform caught my eye immediately. Perfect creases, shiny badge, heavy belt, cap angled sharply. It was a level of formality no marina inspector needed. The man stepped off the boat without waiting for permission, landing on my dock with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the boards under his feet. "Afternoon, Mr. Cole," he called, spreading his arms as if greeting a friend. "I'm Inspector Daniel Cross with Pelican Cliffs Marina Authority. We're here to conduct a mandatory compliance inspection." I tried not to smile. I truly did, because there was no such thing as the Pelican Cliffs Marina Authority. Still, I didn't correct him yet. "On what grounds?" I asked, stepping closer. He flashed a badge. "Routine assessment triggered by complaints from the HOA." "Complaints," I repeated, savoring the word. The second inspector snapped photos with a high-end camera. My dock, my rails, my mooring lines, my trawler. He paused on the hull of the Mariner's Echo as if capturing evidence for a courtroom. Inspector Cross flipped open a folder. "I'm seeing numerous violations already." "Without stepping foot on my vessel?" I asked. He shrugged. "Some things are obvious." The ocean breeze carried the scent of kelp and motor oil. My trawler bobbed calmly nearby, sun glinting off its weathered paint. A seagull landed on the piling beside us, cocking its head as if judging the performance unfolding. Inspector Cross lifted his voice. "Violation 1. Unregistered commercial vessel in a residential zone. Violation 2. Unsafe mooring equipment. Violation 3. Hold on." I raised a hand. "My vessel is registered. Want to see the tag?" He kept talking over me. "Violation 4. Excessive noise potential from diesel engines." "It's not running," I said. "Potential," he replied smugly. He was good, confident in the way only someone pretending to be confident could be. "And finally," he said, snapping his folder shut, "Violation 14. Overall negative aesthetic impact. This trawler is not in line with Pelican Cliffs community standards." Aesthetic impact. I almost laughed again. But instead, I reached casually toward the small mounted camera on the corner post, already recording. "Inspector Cross," I said, "may I see your state-issued marina credentials?" He hesitated. Just a breath, but enough. "Of course," he said, pulling out a laminated card. The moment it hit the sunlight, every flaw shined. The state seal was off-color, printed in flat yellow rather than gold. The ID number had too few digits. The title read, "Marina Authority, missing an I." I exhaled slowly. "You misspelled authority." He jerked the card back. "Printing error." "And your badge?" I pointed. "It doesn't reflect properly. Plastic instead of metal." "Budget cuts," he snapped, defensive. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "And you look familiar." The 2 clipboard carriers stiffened. I continued. "Weren't you in a family picture with Bethany Reed? Her brother-in-law, right?" Same jawline. Same scar near the eyebrow. He went pale. I nodded, letting the silence stretch. Wind rustled the dock ropes. The smell of sea spray lingered between us. "What you're doing," I said carefully, "is impersonating an official inspector. That's illegal, and you're doing it on camera." He cursed under his breath, glancing at the woman with the camera. I pulled out my phone. "I can call Sheriff Hale right now, or you can leave." He backed up slowly toward his boat. "This isn't over, Mr. Cole." "Bethany said the same thing," I replied. "You two should rehearse your lines together." He stepped onto his boat, motioning for the others to follow. They untied from the dock in a rush, nearly scraping the hull on the piling. As the vessel sped off across the water, a rooster tail of white foam trailed behind them. But something else caught my eye. A small shape hovering overhead. Another drone. It angled downward, camera pointed squarely at me, then zipped away toward the HOA's side of the cliffs. Someone was documenting everything, and not for my benefit. I looked out across the churning water, heart steady but alert. A pressure campaign like this wasn't built in a day. It took planning, coordination, fearlessness, or desperation. Either way, they weren't done, not even close. The waves kept rolling in long after the fake inspector's boat disappeared beyond the curve of the coastline, each swell slapping the base of the cliffs in a steady, rhythmic beat. I stood there for a moment, letting the wind push against me, trying to quiet the churn in my mind. Someone was watching. Someone was coordinating. And someone wanted me out badly enough to manufacture a whole enforcement agency. I climbed the wooden stairs back toward the mansion. Seagulls screeched overhead, spiraling around the glass terrace before peeling off into the open sky. The air smelled like seaweed and sun-warmed stone. I needed clarity, answers, something factual to ground myself before the HOA's next wave hit. Inside the house, sunlight poured across the stone floors, turning the walls into a soft glow of gold and cream. The Cliffside mansion was a strange mix of luxury and rugged materials. Steel beams, reclaimed wood, glass walls that framed the ocean like a moving portrait. Judge Whitford, the previous owner, had been meticulous. Every detail had purpose, and somewhere in those details, I felt certain, was the truth. I moved through the house slowly, past the library, the study, the hall lined with nautical charts from the judge's travels until I reached his old office overlooking the marina. The wide oak desk sat beneath a row of built-in cabinets. Most were empty, cleaned out for the sale, but one remained locked. I tested the handle again. It didn't budge. The inspector's lies, the drone surveillance, the forged heritage agreement. I needed more than suspicions. I needed something concrete. I knelt down and inspected the lock, a sturdy brass model, older but well-maintained. A small engraving on the bottom edge caught my eye. Whitford and Son Safe Company. The judge had been thorough. I retrieved a thin utility blade from my desk drawer and slid it gently into the seam. The tumblers inside clicked faintly, then clicked again. After a soft metallic sigh, the latch gave way. The cabinet swung open. Inside, a shallow tin lockbox rested atop a stack of rolled maps. The box was plain, no markings, no label, but when I lifted it, it had weight. Significant weight. I carried it to the desk, set it down, and flipped the latch. The contents were not what I expected. Maps, several, all marked with notes in the judge's careful handwriting. Audio cassettes labeled HOA meeting, off record. A small hard drive wrapped in a cloth, and beneath it all, a folder of documents labeled Development Bids, Pelican Cliffs. A chill traced the back of my neck. I opened the folder first. Page after page revealed striking patterns. Properties purchased, properties foreclosed, families who had been fined into selling. The HOA wasn't simply enforcing rules. They were funneling coastal real estate to a private development firm for a fraction of its worth. And someone had been paid to make that happen. I flipped deeper into the file. Bank transfer, logs, HOA budgets that didn't align with public records, names of former owners, billings from engineering surveyors, notes from the judge himself. Pattern appears intentional. HOA targeting owners with strategic viewsheds. Possible collusion with developer. Must gather proof before confronting board. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in the chair as the waves crashed against the cliffs below. The judge had been onto them. He had found something damning enough that he hid the evidence in a locked cabinet. And the heritage agreement they showed me this morning? A forged attempt to rewrite the past. The next file I examined was even worse. It held minutes from HOA meetings that were clearly not meant for public eyes, discussions of removing problematic owners, of adjusting community standards to force compliance, of creating conditions favorable to acquisition. My hands tightened around the pages. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a scheme. A deliberate, years-long effort to seize properties under the guise of neighborhood improvement. A gust of wind slammed against the glass, rattling the frame. The ocean's voice rose, deep and echoing. The storm that had been dusting the horizon now pulled itself closer, dragging gray clouds across the water like curtains. But I wasn't done. I picked up the USB drive and plugged it into the desktop tower still sitting under the judge's oak desk. A folder popped up instantly. No password, no encryption. The judge had been confident no one else would ever find it. Inside, more files. Emails between HOA board members. Drafts of bylaw amendments that never passed legally, but had quietly been enforced anyway. And a recording named simply, Bethany, Private Est. I hesitated a moment before clicking it. Bethany's voice filled the room, sharp even in low-quality audio. "He won't last," she said. "None of them do. Once the fines start piling up, they always fold. The developers offer doubles if we clear the Cliffside this year. I want those signatures. Make it happen." My jaw tightened. The storm outside cracked with distant thunder. This wasn't petty HOA drama. This was coercion. Fraud. A coordinated attempt to seize the most valuable land on the cliffs. And I was next on the list. My phone buzzed suddenly, vibrating across the wooden desk. I picked it up. "Sarah, any progress?" I took a photo of the documents spread across the desk and sent it. "Remy, you were right. They've been doing this for years. The judge found out too." A long pause before her 3 dots appeared. "Sarah, we need to move carefully. If Whitford suspected them, they may have silenced him. Don't confront them yet. Document everything. Lock it down." Outside, wind whipped against the terrace, sending palm fronds slashing through the air. The storm kept crawling closer, darkening the waves and dragging the scent of rain toward the cliffs. I looked down at the files, maps, logs, recordings. Evidence someone might kill to retrieve. The levees I'd spent my life building were meant to withstand storms. Now I was staring at one I couldn't reinforce with concrete and steel. But the truth was the strongest pillar I had ever held. Whether the HOA liked it or not, I was going to use it. The storm arrived faster than the forecast promised. By mid-afternoon, heavy clouds gathered above the cliffs like a massive gray lid, sealing in the air and dimming the coastline. Gusts rattled the terrace railings, and the hum of the ocean deepened into a low, steady growl. I stood in the study, staring at the files spread across the oak desk. Evidence of years of manipulation, coercion, and quiet land grabs. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressed on my shoulders like wet sand. My phone buzzed against the wood. "Sarah, remember what I said? Don't confront them alone. Call me the moment anything changes." I typed back a quick acknowledgement and slipped the phone into my pocket. Hard to imagine things getting much worse than secret recordings and forged documents. Then the first shout echoed up the cliff. At first it sounded like the wind catching a loose shutter. Then it came again, louder, sharper, magnified. A megaphone. I moved to the terrace doors and slid them open. The sound hit me instantly, chopped into pieces by the gusting wind. "Residents of Pelican Cliffs, gather at the main bridge. We have a community emergency." Bethany. Her voice carried across the canyon like a siren. I stepped outside, gripping the railing as the wind pushed against me. Palm fronds slashed the air, rain misted in thin sheets, and lightning flickered far out over the water. I could see small clusters of neighbors emerging from their homes along the cliffside. Raincoats, umbrellas, cell phones held aloft. I didn't have to guess where they were heading. The bridge. A knot tightened low in my stomach. I grabbed my jacket, locked the sliding door, and made my way down the walkway toward the narrow span that separated my estate from the HOA-controlled road. When I reached the crest of the hill overlooking the bridge, the scene below unfolded like a staged riot. 20 HOA members lined the concrete span, standing shoulder to shoulder with clipboards, cameras, and neon enforcement vests. Bethany stood at the center, the bright pink suit an almost surreal pop of color against the storm-dark sky. 2 portable floodlights illuminated her from both sides, casting harsh shadows across her face. A large HOA SUV blocked the far end of the bridge, effectively sealing off access. She'd brought a crowd. Dozens of residents lined the road, whispering, filming, some drawn by curiosity, others by fear of missing whatever spectacle she planned to unleash next. Bethany lifted the megaphone and pointed straight at me. "Remy Cole!" Her voice blasted across the bridge, sharp as the wind. "You are operating an illegal commercial marina from a residential property. This endangers our community and violates our bylaws." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. I descended the slope slowly, forcing calm into each step. The wind tugged at my jacket, and the concrete felt slick beneath my boots. Bethany continued, pacing dramatically. "We have video evidence of unauthorized vessels, business operations, and violations that threaten property values for every resident here." The camera operators positioned themselves at angles that made the entire staging feel like a press conference or an ambush. When I reached the foot of the bridge, rain began to fall. Light at first, then steadier, dotting the concrete with dark spots. Bethany turned the megaphone off and smirked. "You can't hide behind that decrepit boat anymore," she said. "This community deserves better." "Then start with honesty," I replied. She stiffened. The residents closest to her shifted their weight, as if sensing invisible tension pulling taut. "Oh, believe me," she said sweetly. "I'm being very honest." Behind her, a younger board member lifted a large printed poster, photos of my trawler, nets, crates, even a shot of me hauling the morning catch. Another held a stack of papers, waving them theatrically, as if hoping the wind would scatter them for dramatic effect. "Illegal commercial activity," he shouted. "Documented and verified." I let the storm roll another gust across my shoulders before speaking. "I'm not running a business," I said calmly. "I'm fishing, on my own property, using a vessel I own." Bethany raised her chin. "Your vessel is a blight, Remy, a danger, and your behavior paints a clear picture of someone attempting to hide something." "I'm hiding nothing," I answered. She smiled coldly. "Except evidence." I flicked my eyes toward the crowd, worried residents watching this drama unfold, unsure what truth to latch onto. Then footsteps approached behind me. Sarah. Her hair was pinned back against the wind, and she carried a folder beneath one arm. She walked with certainty, head high, shoulders straight, the embodiment of a woman who'd spent her life in front of judges and county officials. Bethany's smile faltered. "Good afternoon," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the storm. She stepped up beside me, opened her folder, and held up a laminated blueprint for everyone to see. "I'd like the community to take a good look at this." The crowd leaned forward. Even the wind seemed to ease for a heartbeat. "This," Sarah said clearly, "is the county's official property survey. The entire bridge from the main road to the Cliffside platform is privately owned by Mr. Cole." Gasps rippled across the residence. Even a few board members turned to each other in confusion. Sarah continued, rotating the blueprint slightly. "Meaning the HOA had no authority to block this bridge, stage enforcement actions here, or enter his property without explicit permission, including earlier this morning." Bethany's face drained of color. "And," Sarah added, pulling out another document, "we have evidence of forged agreements purporting community ownership, documents that do not exist in any county registry." The murmurs grew louder. A resident shouted, "Is that true, Bethany?" Another called out, "You said the deed was filed." Bethany snatched the megaphone back on. "This is misinformation. He is using a lawyer to twist technicalities against the spirit of our community." Sarah stepped forward. "No, I'm clarifying the law you've been violating." The storm wind howled across the bridge, scattering raindrops sideways. I could feel the shift. Something deep, collective, like the crowd's trust had cracked. People pulled out their phones, zooming in on the blueprint, whispering urgently among themselves. Sheriff Marcus Hale arrived at that precise moment, his patrol vehicle rolling to a stop behind the residence. He stepped out, hat pulled low, rain streaking the brim. "Sheriff!" Bethany shrieked. "Arrest him! He's running a commercial marina!" Marcus looked between us, then at the growing tension among the crowd. Slowly, he reached for the blueprint Sarah held. He studied it. He turned to me. Then he turned to Bethany. "From what I can see," he said slowly, voice carrying through the rain, "the HOA is in violation of state property laws, not Mr. Cole." A stunned silence followed. Bethany's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Her eyes darted wildly between her board members, who suddenly looked much less confident. Lightning split the sky behind her, illuminating the bridge in brilliant white. And in that light, I saw something unmistakable. Fear. Her monopoly on control had fractured. The narrative she'd built around me, around every owner before me, was unraveling, and she knew it. "Residents," she said finally, gripping the megaphone like a lifeline, "do not be fooled. This man is dangerous too." Her voice cracked as a woman near the front shouted, "Show us the real documents, Bethany, or stop talking." Another man yelled, "You forced the Jeffreys out with fake fines. We all know it." The crowd surged, not violently, but decisively, turning on her like a tide reversing direction. Her power, once absolute, was slipping between her fingers. I stood quietly, letting the truth do the work. As the storm thundered overhead, Bethany lowered the megaphone. Her shaking hands betrayed her as she stepped backward, the wind whipping her pink suit like a flag in retreat. But storms don't end in a single gust. And something told me this was only the calm before the next strike. The storm broke apart slowly, peeling itself off the cliffs the way fog lifts from cold morning water. The worst of it had passed. Lightning no longer speared the sky, and the thunder had retreated to a distant, tired rumble. What remained was a world washed in gray mist and dripping surfaces, everything slick, shining, and strangely quiet. Too quiet. The bridge, where minutes earlier a crowd had roared with accusations and disbelief, now stood nearly empty. A few scattered residents lingered near the road, hoods pulled up, whispering as they cast uneasy glances back toward Bethany's retreating figure. She had left quickly, no entourage, no fake authority, no staged confidence. She moved like someone trying to outrun the truth. Sheriff Marcus returned to his patrol vehicle. radio static faintly leaking through the cracked window. Sarah touched my arm before leaving, leaning close so only I could hear her. "Keep everything locked down tonight," she said. "People backed into corners do desperate things." I nodded, though the weight of her warning pressed deeper than the rain-soaked wind. She glanced once more toward the Cliffside homes before driving off, headlights bouncing across the wet pavement. And then it was just me. I stayed on the bridge long enough for the last neighbor to walk away, their footsteps echoing softly until they vanished behind the bend. The lingering mist curled around the railings like cold fingers. The pink smear of sunset struggled through the storm clouds, painting the ocean with faint streaks of rose and copper. But beneath the beauty, an unease settled over everything, a silence heavy enough to bend the air. I made my way back toward the mansion, boots splashing through shallow puddles that reflected the bridge lights in broken shards. The storm's aftermath always carried a scent: wet stone, seaweed, something metallic lurking beneath the air like static waiting to return. The house greeted me with its usual glow, soft lights warming the tall windows, the sound of waves amplified in the wake of the storm. I wiped rain from my jacket, hung it near the door, and double-checked each lock along the hallway, not out of fear, but out of precaution. The judge's files were still spread across the office desk: maps, minutes, hidden agreements, and a recording of Bethany's voice planning coercive actions. The evidence was almost overwhelming in volume and detail, enough to sink any HOA board, enough to expose the developer behind them, enough to make someone, several someones, very nervous. The ocean boomed against the cliffs below, a slow, powerful pulse. I moved through the house, turning on outdoor lights, bridge lamps, marina beacons, soft terrace LEDs. Pools of warm light spilled across the walkways, pushing back the fog. My security cameras blinked awake, their lenses clearing droplets of stormwater as they resumed tracking movement across the property. Everything seemed normal, almost too normal, I stepped out onto the terrace, leaning against the damp railing as I looked down toward the marina. The trawler swayed gently at its moorings, the hull reflecting pale streaks of silver from the moon emerging behind thin clouds. The water below churned in soft, swirling patterns, storm energy slowly fading. And then I heard it, a faint, mechanical hum. Not from the ocean, not from the wind. Higher, subtle. I scanned the sky. A drone hovered above the marina, its small lights blinking faintly in the mist. It wasn't darting freely like the earlier one. It held a steady distance, circling as if mapping angles, identifying blind spots, studying the property with clinical intention. It drifted closer to the cliffs, then ascended quickly, straight toward the neighborhood beyond the ridge. I felt a cold ripple spread down my spine. The HOA wasn't regrouping. They were preparing. I stepped back into the house, shutting the terrace door with a soft click. The judge's notes caught my eye again, open to a page where he had scrawled a sentence in his distinctive, tight handwriting. "Power follows patterns, so does greed." I sat down, letting the weight of the words settle. The pattern was clear: fines, pressure, false claims, forced sales. Whitford had uncovered their operation, and now I was walking the same trail he had, only further. Deep enough to expose their deals with the developer. Deep enough to trigger panic. My phone buzzed. A message. Not from Sarah. Not from Marcus. Not from anyone I recognized. No name. No contact saved. Just a number. And one short line. "You're getting too close." A second message followed immediately. "Bethany isn't acting alone." Then a third. "Be ready tonight." My pulse tightened. The house felt suddenly smaller. The wind outside hit the glass with renewed force, rattling the terrace panes as if echoing the warning. I typed back quickly. "Who is this?" No answer. I waited. 30 seconds. A full minute. Nothing. The storm might have passed, but the air carried the same tension, the feeling that something was forming in the shadows, gathering force behind walls and locked doors across the community. A faint tap against the window made me look up sharply. Just a tree branch, blown by the wind. But my nerves were alert, sharpened. Every sound carried weight. Every shadow held potential. I stood and crossed the room to the safe built into the lower wall of the study. I placed the judge's documents inside, along with the audio recordings and digital copies. The safe door closed with a heavy thud, sealing away the evidence that could unravel the entire scheme. Outside, the drone's hum returned for a moment, fading slowly toward the hills like a ghost drifting home. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that comes right before something breaks, right before someone makes their move. The storm outside might have ended, but the one between me and the HOA was only tightening its grip. And when it struck, I had no doubt it would hit hard. Night settled over the cliffs with the uneasy stillness of a held breath. The storm clouds had retreated toward the horizon, but the wind still carried a cold bite, sweeping across the terrace and rattling the palms as if urging them to speak. The waves below thrashed harder than usual, restless, churning in white foam, pounding the rocks with a rhythm that made the glass panels tremble. I stood at the window overlooking the marina, watching the last hints of lightning flicker far out to sea. The house lights cast long reflections across the polished floors behind me, warm but fragile, like safety that could be extinguished with one wrong gust. The text messages from the unknown number echoed in my mind. "You're getting too close. Bethany isn't acting alone. Be ready tonight." Warnings don't usually come with timestamps, but the heaviness in the air told me the clock was ticking. I double-checked every sensor on the security system: bridge cameras, dock motion lights, terrace alarms. Everything was green. Everything was recording. The judge had designed this house with intention. What he lacked in trust for his community, he compensated with infrastructure. I stepped out to the balcony for a moment. The ocean exhaled cold spray into the air. The moon, pale and half-shrouded, hovered above the water like a silent witness. Then, through the wind, I heard something disturbingly distinct. Footsteps. Not on the terrace. Not on the walkway. On the dock. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I slipped back into the house, closing the door quietly behind me, and moved to the marina-facing windows. Through the mist, I saw silhouettes. 2 men in dark jackets, hoods pulled low, crossing my dock with a sense of rehearsed purpose. One carried a large duffel bag. The other clutched a metal case. I didn't need to guess what was inside. The files in the judge's cabinet had mentioned similar tactics used on other properties. Safety inspections that mysteriously ended in sudden failures, electrical faults, unavoidable structural collapses. This was sabotage. My pulse steadied, not with fear, but with focus. I hit the recording hotspot on my phone and zoomed in through the glass. One man knelt beside the marina's power control junction. The other unzipped the duffel, revealing several tools, bolt cutters, extension cables, something that looked suspiciously like a thermal igniter. Subtle? No. Criminal? Absolutely. The man with the metal case opened it, revealing a panel of instruments that glinted against the dock lights. He began connecting wires to the marina's main feed, something designed to overload the system and likely spark a fire. A fire that would be blamed on my old trawler. A fire that would classify this place as unsafe. A fire that would give the HOA grounds to condemn the estate. I stepped back from the window, dialed quickly, and brought the phone to my ear. Marcus answered on the second ring. Cole? Your prediction was right, I said. They're making their move. What's happening? 2 men on my dock. Tools, wires, equipment. They're tampering with my marina's power system. There was the faint sound of gear shifting, Marcus getting into his cruiser. I'm on my way, he said. Keep distance. Stay inside. Already doing that. I hung up and crossed to the terrace door, cracking it open just enough to let in the wind and the sound of the men whispering to each other. Bethany said to keep it quiet, one hissed. Just rig it and go. She wants this place condemned by sunrise, the other replied. They'll say it's because of that old boat. A faint metallic clang echoed. The igniter piece slid across the dock. Before they could retrieve it, my floodlights burst on, blinding white beams illuminating the entire marina in brilliant clarity. Both men froze like startled animals. Then voices cut through the night, car doors slamming, boots on pavement. Marcus's voice booming across the bridge. Step away from the dock! Hands where we can see them! The men panicked. One bolted toward the far edge of the dock, but the boards were slick from rain. He slipped, catching himself on a rope cleat. The other reached into his jacket, then froze when Marcus shouted again. I said hands in the air! Backup officers streamed behind him, flashlights slicing through the air. The 2 saboteurs reluctantly lifted their hands. One muttered curses under his breath. The other kept his eyes locked on the ground. Marcus approached them carefully, cuffs ready. I watched from the dock entrance, far enough away to stay clear of the arrest, but close enough for my cameras to capture everything. What were you planning to do here? Marcus demanded. No answer. One officer lifted the metal case. Sheriff, you're going to want to see this. The case opened with a click, and even from where I stood, I could see the components. Wiring, timers, a power overload relay. Nothing explosive, nothing overtly dangerous, but enough to shut down a marina and cause a conveniently timed accident. Marcus looked at the men. You're tampering with a private electrical system. That's a felony. The older saboteur cracked first. It wasn't our idea, he blurted out. Bethany said there'd be money. She said the developer needed him out, needed the cliffs cleared for the resort plan. My blood went cold. Resort plan. That was the missing link in the judge's documents. The reason this entire Cliffside, bridge included, had become a target. Marcus exhaled sharply. Who else knew about this? The man swallowed. Everyone on the board, and the developer's rep, they're supposed to get the other properties next. Residents had been driven out for years. Fines, pressure, citations, for a resort built on stolen land. I stepped forward, rain dampening my sleeves. And Bethany promised you payment to sabotage my marina? He nodded miserably. To create unsafe conditions. Then the HOA could condemn it. She said no one would believe you, that you'd be another owner who didn't fit. Marcus turned to one of the officers. Get them in the car. As they were led away, one of them glanced back at me, guilt etched across his face. The other didn't look at me at all. Marcus approached, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said quietly. Just tired of being surprised. He gave a humorless laugh. I'll file charges tonight, and we'll need full statements from you and your attorney. Lightning flashed far out over the water, illuminating the cliffs in a brief wash of silver. Bethany's plan had slipped, her secrecy shattered, and for the first time, the HOA's scheme stood fully exposed. But if I'd learned anything about storms, natural or man-made, it was that the most destructive gust often comes after a moment of uneasy calm. And Bethany Reed was not the type to surrender without trying one last, desperate move. Morning came slowly, pushing a pale gray light across the ocean, as if the sky itself were exhausted from the night before. I hadn't slept much. Quiet hours had stretched long and thin inside the Cliff House, each one heavy with the knowledge that the HOA's operation had finally cracked open. But Bethany herself was still out there, somewhere, plotting a final escape or a last attack. The judge's files lay locked safely in the study, but the weight of what they contained pressed on my thoughts like the air before another storm. I stepped out onto the terrace and breathed in the cold breeze rolling off the Pacific. The marina creaked below, its ropes still damp with rain. The cliffs smelled of salt and wet stone. It should have been peaceful, but the tension from the night still clung to everything like a haze. My phone buzzed. Marcus. Town Hall. Now. They're holding an emergency HOA hearing. And she's there. Of course she was. I grabbed my jacket, locked the door behind me, crossed the private bridge, the concrete still slick from the storm's passing. For once, no one blocked it. No SUVs, no compliance officers, no board members lurking behind clipboards. Only the hum of the wind moving through the guardrails and the distant crash of waves. As I drove into the community center parking lot, clusters of residents gathered along the walkway, talking in tight, anxious circles. Some paused when they saw me. A few nodded respectfully. Others looked confused, caught between the version of me Bethany had painted and the truth that had unfolded the night before. Inside, the town hall buzzed with a charged intensity. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating a packed room, residents shoulder to shoulder, pressing forward, their expressions taut. At the front of the hall, the HOA board sat at a long table, faces pale, papers scattered before them like confetti after a failed parade. Bethany stood in the middle, gripping the podium with white-knuckled tension. Her pink suit looked slightly wrinkled, her hair less perfect than usual, and her voice trembled as she tried to regain her footing. "I assure you," she said, eyes scanning the room, "these allegations are exaggerated. The men arrested last night acted independently, without my knowledge. I remain committed to protecting property values and preserving Pelican Cliffs." A ripple of disbelief moved through the crowd. Marcus stood along the side wall, arms crossed, hat tucked under his arm. He caught my eye and gave a subtle nod toward the front. It was time. Sarah arrived just as I stepped forward, a folder under her arm and determination in her stride. When the residents noticed her, noticed us, voices hushed, replaced by an expectant silence. Bethany's mouth tightened. "You two have no authority to speak at this." Sarah opened her folder and lifted a stack of documents. "These records say otherwise." Gasps crackled through the audience. Sarah handed copies to Marcus, who placed them on the table before the board. "These are financial disclosures," Sarah continued, "showing payments between the HOA and a private developer dating back nearly a decade. Payments tied to forced property transfers. Fines used strategically to drive owners out. Minutes from off-record meetings." She lifted the final sheet. "And here, bank transfers to the 2 men arrested last night." A low rumble rolled through the crowd. Sarah's voice remained clear. "This proves conspiracy, fraud, abuse of authority, and attempted sabotage of Mr. Cole's property." Bethany's face drained of color. Her board members shifted uncomfortably, their rehearsed confidence unraveling like thread pulled from a seam. "That's not true," Bethany sputtered. "You're twisting." Marcus held up a hand. "Enough." His voice had the weight of bedrock. "Ms. Reed," he said, "we have eyewitness statements, recorded audio, forged documents, coerced fines, and 2 men in custody who've already cooperated." She stumbled back a step. "This community trusted you," he continued, "and you exploited that trust." The hall erupted. Shouts, demands, angry questions from people who had lived for years under the shadow of her rules. Sarah waited until the room quieted before adding, We're requesting immediate dissolution of the Pelican Cliffs HOA board pending the formal investigation. A resident near the back raised his voice. Seconded. Another. Third. Chairs scraped. Papers flew. For the first time since this nightmare began, momentum shifted fully and irrevocably toward truth. Bethany's composure shattered. She pointed at me with trembling hands. You don't belong here. This entire community. Marcus stepped forward as she spiraled, his voice firm. Bethany Reed, you're under arrest for fraud, filing falsified documents, and conspiracy to interfere with property rights. Gasps sliced through the room. Residents parted like a tide as officers approached to guide her away. She struggled only for a moment, until reality set in. Her shoulders sagged. The megaphone voice, the intimidation, the arrogance. It all drained from her as she was led past me. This isn't over, she whispered hoarsely. You ruined everything. No, I said quietly. The truth did. Outside, the sun finally pierced the thinning clouds, casting a beam of warm light across the walkway, the first true sunlight since the storm. Days later, Pelican Cliffs transformed. The board was dissolved. Records were audited. Families who had been unjustly fined or pressured into leaving were contacted for restitution. Residents elected a temporary committee, led by none other than the retired schoolteacher everyone trusted, Mrs. Avery, until a transparent system could replace the HOA entirely. As for me, I returned to the Cliffside mansion. I stood on my private bridge that evening as the HOA SUVs sun descended toward the horizon, its reflection shimmering across the water and catching the steel lines of the marina below. The light turned the waves gold. The property felt lighter now, freer. No drones buzzed overhead. No suits blocked the bridge. Just the sound of ocean wind moving through the palms and the soft echo of a world returning to calm. I opened the walkway gate, letting the breeze sweep through the metal bars. Justice hadn't been loud. It had been patient, and it had prevailed. I walked down to the dock as the sky deepened to orange, the mariner's echo rocking gently at its moorings. I placed a hand on the worn wooden rail, feeling the familiar salt-sanded texture beneath my fingers. Power isn't loud, I murmured, thinking of the judge, of his files, of everything that had led here. Real power is the truth, written, signed, undeniable. My phone buzzed with a final message from Sarah. If another HOA tries this, you know who to call. I smiled. The ocean breeze carried the scent of kelp and possibility. What happens when the next one comes? I said softly, watching the waves break against the rocks. Well, I added, I've kept every camera rolling. If you've ever had to stand your ground against an HOA or anyone who thought they owned more than the truth, drop a simple yes in the comments. Justice only works when ordinary folks refuse to back down. And if stories like this remind you why we fight to protect our homes, our land, and our dignity, I'd be honored to have you stay. Hit subscribe and stick around for the next story. We've got plenty more justice to serve.